Orcas are awe-inspiring giants of the ocean, revered for their beauty and intelligence. But when these powerful creatures are exploited for profit and entertainment, the consequences can be devastating. In this episode, we're unveiling the most brutal and deadly orca attacks ever captured on camera. Let's dive into the first story. On a crisp autumn morning in 1987, the sun cast a gentle glow over SeaWorld San Diego. The park was alive with the laughter of children and the excited chatter of families, all eager to witness the day's performances. The air was filled with the scent of saltwater and the distant calls of seagulls, creating an atmosphere of anticipation and joy. However, beneath the surface of this idyllic scene, a storm was brewing. One that would soon shatter the tranquility and leave an indelible mark on all who witnessed it. John Sillick, 26, stood backstage, his heart racing with a mix of excitement and nerves. A marine mammal trainer at SeaWorld, John had dedicated his life to working with orcas and dolphins. His passion for marine life had been evident since childhood, and he had worked tirelessly to turn his dream into a reality. Known for his dedication and skill, John had formed strong bonds with the animals under his care. Today, he was set to perform a routine with two of SeaWorld's most renowned orcas, Corky and Orky 2. Corky, a female orca, was a seasoned performer with a gentle demeanor. Captured in 1969, she had spent the majority of her life in captivity. Despite the challenges she faced, Corky had become a beloved figure at SeaWorld. Known for her intelligence and grace, her bond with John was evident. They had performed together countless times, their routines a symbol of their mutual trust and understanding. Orky 2, a male orca, was a mighty presence in the water. Captured in 1968, he had spent many years at SeaWorld, contributing to numerous performances. His size and strength were awe-inspiring, but his temperament was less predictable. While he had participated in many routines, there were occasional signs of restlessness and aggression, subtle cues that often went unnoticed in the excitement of the performances. As the show commenced, the audience was captivated by the synchronized movements of Corky and John. Their routine was a highlight of the performance, showcasing the deep connection between trainer and animal. The crowd cheered, oblivious to the undercurrents of tension that had begun to surface. Orky 2, who had been performing with another trainer, was now approaching the area where John and Corky were performing. His movements were more erratic than usual, his eyes wide and unfocused. John signaled for Corky to perform a breach, a move they had executed flawlessly countless times. Corky responded, propelling herself out of the water with grace. However, as she descended, Orky 2 leapt from the water, his massive body crashing down upon John and Corky. The impact was catastrophic. John was crushed beneath the weight of the two orcas, his body pinned between them. The audience gasped in horror as the scene unfolded before their eyes. Despite the efforts of the other trainers to distract him, the orcas remained unresponsive, their focus solely on the trapped trainer. It was only after what seemed like an eternity that Orky 2 and Corky finally retreated, allowing John to be pulled from the water. John was immediately transported to the hospital where he underwent multiple surgeries to repair the extensive injuries he had sustained. He had suffered fractures to his pelvis, femur, and ribs, injuries that would leave him in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. The physical scars were evident, but the emotional and psychological toll was profound. In the aftermath of the incident, SeaWorld faced intense scrutiny. The attack was attributed to a mistake in cueing during the performance, with Orky 2 inadvertently landing on John and Corky. However, many questioned the safety protocols in place, and the decision to allow trainers to perform such routines with large, powerful animals. The incident led to a reevaluation of safety measures, with SeaWorld implementing stricter guidelines for trainer-animal interactions. John's life was irrevocably changed. He retired from his position as a marine mammal trainer, dedicating himself to advocacy for ethical treatment of marine animals and the importance of safety in marine parks. His story became a cautionary tale, highlighting the inherent risks of working with wild animals in captivity and the need for constant vigilance and respect for their power and unpredictability. The incident also sparked a broader conversation about the ethics of keeping marine mammals in captivity. Animal rights activists used the attack as evidence of the dangers posed to both trainers and animals in such environments. The debate intensified, leading to increased public awareness and calls for reform in the treatment of marine life. It was a serene afternoon on July 11, 2006 in Monterey, California. The sun hung lazily in the sky, casting long, golden rays over the Pacific Ocean. Seaside Marine Park, a beloved local attraction, buzzed with life as visitors strolled past exhibits, taking in the beauty of the coastal setting. The sound of waves crashing gently against the shore blended with the laughter of children and the distant calls of seagulls. The bright, warm atmosphere belied the tension that quietly simmered beneath the surface, especially for those who worked behind the scenes. Seaside Marine Park, nestled along the stunning coast of Monterey, California, had been a popular attraction since its opening in 1987. Initially focused on rehabilitating injured marine life, the park expanded in the late 1990s to feature high-energy shows with dolphins, sea lions, and eventually its prized orca Nero. Captured off the coast of Iceland in 1995, Nero was separated from his pod at just 3 years old, an experience that left a mark on the young orca. Despite his early trauma, Nero quickly became the park's star. Seaside Marine Park averaged 8,000 visitors weekly, with the orca shows accounting for nearly 60% of ticket sales. By 2006, Nero was performing 5 shows per week, each featuring choreographed routines that emphasized his size and agility. His powerful size, 19 feet long and weighing 9,000 pounds, and his high-energy performances made him a crowd favorite. However, beneath his majestic exterior, Nero's behavior began to show signs of distress. Lila Weston, 25, had always been captivated by the ocean. Growing up in San Francisco, she spent countless hours watching documentaries about marine life, her curiosity about the creatures beneath the surface shaping her childhood. Her fascination with orcas was sparked at age 7 during a family trip to Seaside Marine Park, where she first saw Nero perform. From that moment, she was determined to work with marine mammals. Her older sister Emma had already set the path, working as a senior trainer at Seaside Marine Park when Lila was still in high school. Inspired by Emma's dedication, Lila pursued a degree in marine biology and joined the park as a trainer in 2005. The two sisters formed a close-knit team, working side by side, with Lila quickly becoming one of Nero's primary trainers. Compassionate, driven, and deeply empathetic, Lila was respected by her colleagues for her ability to balance professionalism with genuine care for the animals she worked with. Outside the park, Lila spent her weekends volunteering at wildlife rescue centers and hiking along the California coast, always feeling connected to nature. By early 2006, however, Lila began noticing subtle changes in Nero's behavior. The once majestic orca, whose high-energy performances had always captivated the crowd, started showing signs of stress. Nero began slamming his tail against the tank walls, refusing to eat and ignoring commands. Lila documented these changes carefully, concerned that the constant demands of his performance schedule were taking a toll on him. Despite her repeated warnings to park management, they dismissed her concerns, claiming Nero's behavior was within the normal limits for a captive orca. She confided in Emma just days before the incident, telling her she feared for both Nero's welfare and the safety of the trainers. Emma encouraged her to keep pushing for change, but both sisters felt powerless against the park's priorities. Eventually, the park would acknowledge the danger, but far too late and in the worst way possible. As the audience settled into their seats on June 11th for the park's most popular show, the Orca performance, Lila stood at the edge of the tank. Emma stood by her side watching intently. The sisters shared quiet worries amongst themselves about Nero's increasingly concerning change in behavior. The performance began like any other. Nero executed his opening tricks with the usual energy, performing a series of breaches and tail slaps, thrilling the audience. Lila guided him through each movement with the precision of years of training. The crowd cheered, and Nero seemed to respond well, just as he had done so many times before. But as the show continued, Nero's behavior was becoming less predictable. He was slower to respond to commands and seemed to be distracted by something beneath the surface of the water. Yet the performance went on and no one in the crowd seemed to notice. The final act of the show was always the high-flying breach, a move that had become a signature of Lila and Nero's performances. Lila would enter the water alongside Nero, swimming with him for a few moments before signaling for the grand finale. Nero would breach the water, soaring through the air and diving back down, just missing Lila's body as he arced above her. It was a thrilling display of trust and synchronization, one that had captivated audiences for years. But today, as Lila slid into the water beside him, she felt a creeping unease that she couldn't shake. Nero swam with her as he always had, but there was something off about his movements. They were jerky, less fluid, and his usual grace was replaced by a subtle tension in his body. Lila signaled for him to begin the breach, but Nero didn't follow the command. Instead, he swam around her in tight circles, his eyes wide and unfocused, as if distracted. Lila raised her hand again more forcefully this time, but Nero didn't seem to acknowledge her. His movements became more frantic, his body tightening with every stroke. Nero failed to follow the cues, his movements growing more erratic, drifting further from the routine they had perfected. Then Nero attacked. The roar of the crowd went silent in an instant. A gasp filled the air as Nero's massive body shot toward Lila, his jaws closing around her leg with terrifying speed. The water churned violently as Nero dragged Lila under, his strength overwhelming. Lila screamed, but her voice was swallowed by the roar of the tank. For a moment, the audience was frozen in confusion, unsure if this was part of the act. But when they saw the frantic flailing of Lila's body and the blood rising to the surface, the reality of the situation became tragically clear. Trainers on the platform rushed to act, tossing life rings and shouting commands in a desperate attempt to redirect Nero's attention. But the Orca remained unresponsive, his focus solely on Lila. Nero continued to thrash violently, slamming Lila's body against the walls of the tank, each impact more brutal than the last. The crowd screamed in horror as the unthinkable unfolded before them. Lila fought against the Orca's grip, but she was no match for his raw power. For nearly 3 minutes, Nero held onto her, the struggle becoming more desperate with each passing second. Finally, with a forceful jerk, Nero released Lila. Her unconscious body floated to the surface of the tank, limp and lifeless. The trainers dove into the water, pulling her from the tank as paramedics rushed to the scene. Lila was quickly rushed to Monterey Community Hospital, but the damage was severe. Despite the efforts of the medical team, Lila was pronounced dead at 3:42 p.m., just over an hour after the attack. In the aftermath, evidence surfaced showing Nero's behavior had been escalating for months, and that Lila had repeatedly voiced her concerns. Despite this, the park had failed to take action. Seaside Marine Park never recovered. Attendance dwindled and sponsors withdrew their support. By mid-2007, the park announced its closure. Nero, the orca who had been at the center of the tragedy, was relocated to a marine sanctuary off the coast of British Columbia, where he could live in a more natural environment. Lila's experience with captive orcas was not an isolated incident. Born and raised in Spain, Alexis Martinez had always held a deep fascination for animals. He started working at Loro Park Zoo in 2004, about the time the park introduced orcas to its marine life exhibits. This opportunity had been a dream come true for Alexis, who quickly rose through the ranks to become one of the park's leading trainers. At just 29, he was already recognized for his talent, calm demeanor, and dedication to his work. By the time of the incident, Loro Park housed 4 orcas and employed a small team of specialized trainers, each carefully chosen for their ability to work with these powerful animals. Kido was born in captivity in 1995 at SeaWorld Orlando, far from the wild waters where orcas truly belong. He knew nothing but the confinement of marine tanks, where he was groomed to perform from a young age, trained to execute precise routines for the thrill of a watching crowd. By 2006, he was transferred thousands of miles across the Atlantic to Loro Park in the Canary Islands, where he became a main attraction. But Kido was not just a showpiece. At over 6,600 pounds, he embodied the raw, untamed power of the ocean. Behind those controlled performances lay an unpredictable force, and even with rigorous training, there was always an edge of risk. His immense size, combined with an instinctive power, brought an underlying and constant tension to every interaction. Kido may have been born in captivity, but lurking within was the mind and muscle of a predator, a creature that could turn in an instant. And that Christmas Eve in 2009 would become a day that no trainer or guest at Loro Park would ever forget. The show unfolded with all the excitement and awe the audience had come to expect. Families watched in anticipation, eyes fixed on Alexis and the powerful orca by his side. For Alexis, this night was a chance to display the deep connection and skill built over years with Kido. He had worked tirelessly to perfect each movement, every flip and glide, and tonight it all came together. He was the star trainer, known for his bond with the orcas and his captivating performances, and this night would be no exception. As Alexis slipped into the water, Kido moved beside him, an enormous, sleek form cutting through the pool. Together they danced, a display of strength and elegance rehearsed to perfection. Each command seemed to unlock a moment of brilliance from the orca. Trainers along the edge, including Brian Roich, stood ready, their eyes trained on every flick of Kido's tail and rise of Alexis's hand. The crowd cheered louder with each feat, their applause swelling with every flawless move. Yet, as the performance reached its peak, a tension began to fill the air. Kido's movements shifted, his massive body slowing, his powerful tail cutting through the water with a new intensity. Alexis continued, steady and poised, guiding Kido with a calm certainty. But suddenly, Kido blocked his path, his immense body pressing into the space where Alexis needed to move. The crowd watched, captivated, unaware of the shift. In a terrifying instant, Kido's playful energy turned deadly. With a powerful lunge, he rammed Alexis, pinning him to the bottom of the 40-foot pool. Was this just a display of dominance or something far darker? The audience remained silent, captivated yet unaware, while trainers shouted commands that fell on deaf ears. Kido, locked in, seemed unstoppable, and what had started as a routine show had turned into a nightmare unfolding before their eyes. The horrified crowd, paralyzed by shock, began to realize they were witnessing one of the darkest moments in SeaWorld's history. Was this the moment that would finally shatter the illusion of control over these powerful animals? In that moment, the water turned from a stage to a battleground. Kido rammed Alexis again and again, crushing him against the walls of the tank, his massive body shuddering with each impact. Above, the trainers acted fast, sending signals and calling for emergency measures, but Kido held his ground, defying every attempt to separate him from the trainer. The orca surfaced briefly, lifting Alexis's body on his nose, as if presenting him to the stunned audience before dragging him back down into the depths. When Kido finally released him, Alexis's lifeless form lay at the bottom of the tank, his injuries devastating, his body bearing the brutal marks of Kido's force. The rescue team rushed to pull him from the water, but it was already too late. Alexis had died from his injuries. The park fell silent, the cheers replaced by the weight of what had just occurred. In the aftermath of Alexis Martinez's shocking death, Loro Park came under intense scrutiny. The park's initial explanation, drowning, quickly unraveled under the harsh truth of the autopsy. Multiple fractures, crushed organs, and clear bite marks told a different story, one of a brutal attack. Was this an isolated tragedy, or was it part of a pattern? Just 3 years earlier, trainer Claudia Volhard had suffered a similar fate, pulled underwater and battered by an orca, an incident the park brushed off as accidental. Could there be a deeper issue lurking beneath the surface? The fallout from Alexis's death reverberated throughout the marine entertainment industry. Loro Park suspended all in-water performances with orcas, an unprecedented pause for the park as they reassessed safety protocols and introduced stricter barriers between trainers and orcas. Loro Park, perched along the rugged coastline of Puerto de la Cruz in Tenerife, is a world-renowned sanctuary for some of nature's most awe-inspiring creatures. Spanning 135,000 square meters of lush greenery and vibrant habitats, it welcomes millions of visitors each year, drawn to its extraordinary collection of wildlife. What began as a haven for parrots had over the years blossomed into something far greater, an experience home to dolphins, penguins, and the commanding presence of orcas in its famed Orca Ocean exhibit. The early 2000s marked a turning point for the park, as it ventured into marine life, transforming it into a magnet for thrill seekers and animal lovers alike. At the heart of its appeal were the orca shows, mesmerizing displays of strength, intelligence, and sheer beauty. Audiences marveled as these marine giants leapt into the air, their powerful tails sending cascades of water into the cheering crowds. Yet behind the sparkling waters of the Orca Ocean, a quieter, more complex reality simmered beneath the surface. Tekoa, a 6-year-old male orca weighing over 1,500 kilograms, was one of the stars of the show. His size and power were captivating, but for those who worked closely with him, Tekoa's story was more complicated. Trainers like Claudia had spent years forging a bond with him, learning to read his subtle cues, each flick of a tail or tilt of his massive head revealing hints of his mood. But orcas are wild creatures, their instincts and emotions often inscrutable. While Tekoa had displayed moments of aggression before, they were fleeting, never quite enough to sound the alarm. Until now. What no one could have predicted was how quickly things could change. Beneath the polished surface of the performance, there was an unspoken truth. Even the most skilled trainers could only guess at the storm brewing in Tekoa's mind. And sometimes the waters of Orca Ocean, no matter how crystal clear, could conceal the darkest of depths. Tekoa's early life was marked by disruption. Just months after his birth, he was separated from his mother, Taima, due to her growing aggression, a behavior that had been seen with her previous calves. This aggression was believed to stem from a traumatic experience in her past, where she witnessed her mother, Gudrun, attempt to drown her disabled calf. After the separation, Tekoa was raised by Kalina, a more experienced female orca, and often paired with his half-brother Tuar. Their bond became one of the few constants in Tekoa's turbulent life. In 2004, Tekoa and Tuar were transferred to SeaWorld San Antonio, where they joined a new group of orcas. His time at SeaWorld and later at Loro Park only intensified the challenges he faced, as he often endured aggression from his peers, leaving visible marks from countless confrontations. Despite these challenges, Tekoa grew into a powerful and unpredictable animal, shaped by a complex past that likely influenced the aggression he would later direct toward his trainers. Claudia Volhard, a 29-year-old marine biologist from Weinheim, Germany, was one of Tekoa's devoted trainers. For her, working with orcas had always been a thrilling and natural experience. Europe's only female orca trainer, Claudia had spent years at Loro Park, building deep bonds with creatures that most people would only ever glimpse from a distance. A former model turned marine biologist, her shift from the fashion world to the depths of the Orca Ocean had always felt like fate. Through unwavering dedication, she had earned her place at the park, and in the water, she felt an almost mystical connection with Tekoa. But today, as she prepared for another session, an unusual tension hung in the air. It was just another training session, or so it seemed. Claudia stood at the edge of the pool, awaiting Tekoa's signal. His enormous form cut through the water, his dorsal fin slicing through the surface. He approached her calmly as if to reassure her that nothing was amiss. The session was simple. Tekoa was supposed to nudge Claudia's feet with his snout as they swam together, a typical exercise that highlighted the synchronicity between trainer and orca. Claudia reached out, feeling the cold, smooth surface of the water beneath her. Her movements were fluid, practiced. Tekoa's powerful body surged forward, but something was off. His usual grace was replaced with an unsettling force. She didn't have time to react. In an instant, Tekoa's snout collided with her chest, knocking the air from her lungs. The impact was sudden and Claudia's body slammed against the water with a force that reverberated through her bones. Before she could take another breath, Tekoa surged forward again, and the full weight of his body struck her once more, sending her spiraling beneath the water. Her arms flailed as she tried to stabilize herself, but the water was now a blur of cold, unforgiving depths. Then came the sensation of being pulled, not with gentle guidance, but with the raw, unrelenting strength of an animal that could easily overpower her. Tekoa's massive form dragged her downward, his teeth grazing her arm as he pulled her into the abyss of the pool's deepest point, 40 feet below the surface. A moment of weightlessness, then the pressure of the water, the sheer depth pushing against her chest, constricting her lungs. Claudia's vision blurred, the world around her fading as the sound of rushing water drowned out everything else. Tekoa's teeth clamped down on her arm, sharp and firm, the feeling like nothing she had ever encountered before. Her mind raced, and yet she couldn't summon the strength to break free. She kicked desperately, but there was no escaping his grip. Seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the force pulling her down released. Tekoa resurfaced, his teeth still clutching her arm, and his powerful muscles propelled them both back to the surface. The air was cold against her face as she gasped for breath, struggling to stay conscious. The world around her came into focus, but the pain in her arm and chest was overwhelming. She tried to scream, but all that emerged was a strangled gasp. Her colleagues who had been standing by the poolside saw the danger unfolding. Without a moment's hesitation, they rushed to the edge, pulling her from the water and away from the grasp of the orca. Claudia's body was limp, her chest heaving as they hauled her to safety. She could barely comprehend what had just happened. The attack, that's what it had been, an attack, had happened so quickly, so unexpectedly, that even she had trouble accepting it. The trainers worked in a blur of action, and soon Claudia was rushed to the hospital. Miraculously, she survived the attack, but her injuries were severe, a broken elbow, a bruised lung, and deep internal trauma. As doctors worked to stabilize her, it became clear that the physical wounds were only part of the ordeal. The mental toll would linger long after the bruises faded. Back at Loro Park, the reality of the situation began to set in. Tekoa had always been a powerful animal, but no one had anticipated that he would lash out with such violence. His previous behaviors had been seen as quirks, not threats, but now the trainers knew the risks more intimately. The park's management decided that water-based training with Tekoa would be suspended indefinitely. The decision, though made in haste, was a painful acknowledgement of the risks inherent in working with orcas. For Claudia, recovery was a slow process, marked by the enduring scars of the attack. The park itself faced irreversible changes. Trainers no longer entered the water with Tekoa, and the once thrilling shows took on a somber tone. Questions about the ethics of captivity grew louder, as Tekoa's actions became a stark reminder of the unpredictable nature of even the most trained wild animals, challenging the illusion of control over creatures of such immense power. Claudia's story may have shocked the world, but the real victims are the orcas themselves, forced into a life of captivity they never chose. It was a day like any other in 1971 when SeaWorld's latest star, Shamu, a 9-year-old orca, performed her tricks before an eager crowd. The audience marveled at the sheer power and grace of the killer whale as she swam in synchronized routines, delighting families and children. For years, the name Shamu had been a symbol of joy and wonder, a living testament to the marvels of the ocean. But on that fateful day, everything changed. Shamu's life had been one of captivity and confusion since her violent capture from the waters of Puget Sound in 1965. She had been torn from her mother by Ted Griffin, a man known for his ruthless orca hunts. The traumatic capture left Shamu with scars that would never heal. Her mother, desperate to protect her, had been harpooned and left bleeding, sinking like a stone into the water. Shamu was left behind, helpless, as Griffin claimed her for his collection. After her capture, Shamu was sold to SeaWorld, where she was thrust into a world far from the open waters she once roamed. The marine park, a new attraction in San Diego, promised to showcase the beauty of the ocean, but it was a paradise only for the humans. For Shamu, it was an unending nightmare of confinement. The tank she was housed in was too small for her 1,700-pound frame, 20 feet by 30 feet, a mere fraction of the space she needed. For Shamu, the vast expanse of the ocean was replaced by cold concrete walls and glass. The natural world she had once known was gone. In SeaWorld, Shamu's days were filled with forced performances. She was trained to jump, spin, and interact with her trainers in ways that went against every instinct her body had left. Despite her obedience, the mental and physical toll of captivity began to wear on her. The park, oblivious to the damage it was inflicting, continued to use Shamu as a living spectacle, a symbol of entertainment and profit. The crowds cheered, but Shamu's spirit quietly broke under the strain of captivity. By 1971, SeaWorld had grown into a bustling empire, expanding with new parks in Florida and Texas. The demand for more orcas was high, and the company continued to capture and confine wild orcas. But beneath the success of the shows, a darker truth began to emerge. Shamu's life was not one of joy, but of immense suffering, and the attack that would unfold that year was a consequence of the years of abuse she had endured. On April 19, 1971, SeaWorld Public Relations Director Gail McLaughlin and employee Kent Burgess devised a stunt they believed would show just how safe and thrilling the orca shows were. They asked Anna Eckes, a SeaWorld secretary and trained scuba diver, if she would be interested in riding Shamu as part of a promotional event. Anna, eager to be close to the famous orca, agreed to participate. Anna entered the water with Shamu, following the cues given by her by the trainers. At first, everything seemed fine. Shamu swam calmly toward her, cooperative as always. Anna climbed onto her back and raised her hand in the air, smiling at the crowd. But the trust between Shamu and her trainers did not extend to strangers. For Shamu, who had suffered years of mental strain and trauma, the sudden presence of an unfamiliar person was too much. Without warning, Shamu hurled Anna off her back and into the water. Chaos erupted. Anna, stunned and disoriented, struggled to react as Shamu's powerful jaws clamped down on her leg. The audience's screams were drowned out by the horrifying sound of teeth sinking into flesh. Shamu dragged Anna beneath the surface, her body thrashing violently through the water. Blood began to stain the pool as Anna's leg was held tightly in the orca's mouth. The trainers, frantic, dove into the water in a desperate attempt to stop the attack. One trainer swam towards Shamu's mouth, forcing open her jaw with all his strength. After what felt like an eternity, Shamu released Anna, who was pulled from the water, her leg battered and bleeding. The crowd fell into stunned silence, unable to comprehend what they had just witnessed. Anna was rushed to the hospital where doctors worked to close the deep gash in her leg. She survived the attack but was left with lasting physical and emotional scars. She filed a lawsuit against SeaWorld citing negligence, fraud, and the inherent dangers of working with wild animals. Anna was awarded $17,500 in damages, but no amount of money could undo the trauma she had experienced. Shamu's life after the attack only worsened. Her performing days were over, but the isolation and confinement she endured continued to take a toll. Without the stimulation of her daily shows, Shamu was left to circle endlessly in her tiny tank. The constant mental and physical stress of captivity began to degrade her health. By the end of 1971, Shamu contracted a severe uterine infection that could not be treated. She died at just 9 years old, a tragic victim of a system that exploited her for profit. In the wild, orcas can live to be 80 years old. But Shamu's life was cut short by the cruelty she had endured in captivity. Her death was a blow to SeaWorld's image, but the park continued to profit from the spectacle of orca shows. A new orca, Helena, took Shamu's place and the shows went on. But Shamu's tragic life remained a dark reminder of the cost of human entertainment. Marine parks often present a captivating image of thrilling performances with magnificent animals. But behind the scenes, the reality can be starkly different. Working with powerful creatures like orcas comes with risks that can lead to devastating consequences. For Kelty Byrne, a trainer at Sealand, the joy of working with these incredible animals would soon become overshadowed by tragedy. Sealand of the Pacific, located in Canada, was known for its exciting displays featuring orcas, sea lions, and dolphins. Each day, the trainers and animals captivated audiences, creating a facade that masked the often harsh realities of captivity. Among the orcas was Tilikum, a killer whale with a troubled past that raised significant ethical concerns about keeping such intelligent creatures confined. Tilikum was captured off the coast of Iceland at just 2 years old, torn from his pod, and thrust into a life of confinement. His first year in captivity was particularly difficult, filled with isolation and stress. When he arrived at Sealand in 1984, he shared a tank with 2 older female orcas, Ha-1 and Nutka-4. The close quarters led to a harsh social hierarchy, and Tilikum often found himself the target of bullying, resulting in significant physical and mental strain. Despite his troubled past, Tilikum had a strong bond with his trainers, particularly Eric Walters, a biologist who recognized the need for compassionate care. However, the demands of entertainment often overshadowed the animal's welfare. In an effort to manage the aggressive dynamics among the orcas, Sealand hired a new head trainer named Bruce Stevens from SeaWorld. He warned the trainers that if they didn't keep the orcas engaged, the animals might resort to dangerous behavior to entertain themselves. But as we know about human nature, many ignored this warning or failed to act until the situation grew dire. They believed they had more time, unaware that the tensions among the orcas were escalating. Eric, among those trainers, grew increasingly concerned as he noticed Tilikum and the other orcas becoming restless. He believed that the environment at Sealand was like a fast food restaurant, where the focus was on quick entertainment rather than the well-being of the animals. Tilikum, a highly intelligent creature, deserved more than a life filled with repetitive routines. As boredom and frustration set in among the orcas, they began to display increasingly aggressive behaviors. This change in demeanor made any interaction with humans more dangerous. By May 1989, Eric decided to leave Sealand. He felt that the situation was becoming untenable and feared that someone would eventually get hurt. Tragically, his warning would come true on February 20th, 1991, when an ordinary day at the park transformed into a nightmare. While visitors enjoyed the attractions, Kelty, a passionate 20-year-old trainer, prepared for her shift. She loved her work with the orcas, especially Tilikum. The morning started like any other. Trainers fed the orcas and moved through their usual routines. Kelty felt a spark of excitement as she stepped into the training area, her pulse quickening at the thought of working with Tilikum. But something felt different. The orcas were unusually restless, splashing and vocalizing louder than usual. Kelty noticed Tilikum circling the tank with a powerful energy that hinted at his frustration. She felt a twinge of unease but set it aside, focusing on the day's schedule. As the trainers went through their morning drills, Kelty worked closely with Tilikum, trying to engage him with toys and signals. The other trainers exchanged worried glances, but the routine continued. Kelty felt a thrill every time she interacted with Tilikum, oblivious to the growing tension. She believed she could manage the situation, confident in her bond with the Orca. The moment of crisis came unexpectedly. After finishing her training session, Kelty slipped and fell into Tilikum's tank. In a split second, Tilikum seized her foot, dragging her beneath the surface. Panic erupted as her fellow trainers rushed to help. The sight of Kelty in Tilikum's grasp was horrifying. She was caught by a 22.5-foot long, 12,500-pound giant with strength that made escape impossible. Still, she fought fiercely, gasping for breath each time she surfaced, only to be pulled back under by the powerful Orca. Chaos erupted as trainers threw life rings into the tank, desperately trying to save Kelty. They banged on buckets and tossed fish to distract the Orcas, but Tilikum's grip remained unyielding. In a terrifying moment, Kelty surfaced, caught in Tilikum's jaws, screaming for help. Then, just as quickly, she vanished beneath the water's surface, silence replacing her cries. Despite her drowning, it took the trainers another 2 hours to persuade the Orcas to release her. By that time, Tilikum and the other whales had bitten and stripped her multiple times, showcasing the power and unpredictability of these magnificent creatures. Retrieving her body took nearly 2 hours, during which Tilikum and the other whales continued to bite and drag her, a stark demonstration of their immense power. Tilikum, being the largest orca in captivity, made Kelty's struggle even more perilous. Sealand's management quickly labeled the incident a tragic accident. However, many, including Paul Spong, director of Orca Lab, believed it was predictable, stemming from the harsh conditions the orcas endured. In the wake of the tragedy, Sealand closed its doors, but Tilikum's story continued when he was transferred to SeaWorld in Orlando. There, trainers claimed to be unaware of his troubled history, overlooking the warning signs that had accompanied his past. This oversight would lead to further tragedy. In July 1999, Daniel Dukes, a man who had evaded security to spend the night in the park, was found dead in Tilikum's tank, his body showing signs of trauma. It was a quiet July night at SeaWorld Orlando, Florida. During the day, the sprawling park buzzed with families and excitement, but now it lay silent under the faint glow of the moon. The only sounds were the gentle ripples in the tanks where the park's most famous residents rested. In the largest enclosure swam Tilikum, a 12,000-pound orca measuring over 22 feet in length. Known for his immense size and striking black and white patterns, Tilikum was both awe-inspiring and enigmatic, a creature whose sheer presence hinted at raw, untamed power beneath the surface. But this calm was about to shatter with the arrival of an unexpected intruder. Daniel Dukes, a 27-year-old drifter, was a man of contradictions. He had a troubled history marked by drug abuse and a string of petty arrests for offenses like trespassing, theft, and drug possession. While gentle and nature-loving to some, neighbors described him as a kind soul who fed the homeless and cared for wildlife. Others saw a man wrestling with deep personal struggles. Dukes was also prone to impulsive, erratic behavior. In one infamous incident, he broke into the home of Richard Garriott, the creator of the game Ultima, which Dukes was reportedly obsessed with. Rather than fleeing when Garriott fired a warning shot, Dukes bizarrely made his way to the bedroom, stripped down, and climbed into Garriott's bed before being arrested by police. In the days leading up to his fateful encounter with Tilikum, Dukes had been arrested again and was reportedly behaving oddly in the SeaWorld park. While most visitors saw orcas as mere spectacles, Dukes viewed them as spiritual beings, an idea that would ultimately lead him too close to danger. On the day of the incident, Daniel Dukes entered SeaWorld like any other guest, blending seamlessly into the crowds. He wandered the park, taking in the sights, but it was clear that one attraction captivated him more than any other. From the stands overlooking the Orca tanks, his gaze remained fixed on Tilikum. While other visitors came and went, chatting and snapping photos, Daniel lingered, watching the massive orca with an intensity that set him apart. As the day drew to a close and the crowds began to thin, Daniel's behavior took on an unusual determination. Despite the barriers and prominent warning signs around the enclosures, he showed no intention of leaving. Whether driven by a yearning for freedom or a misguided belief in forging a deeper connection with the orca, his resolve was unshaken. When the park's gates finally closed and the last visitors filed out, Daniel stayed behind, alone in his thoughts and purpose. With the park now cloaked in darkness, Daniel made his move. The once vibrant SeaWorld, now eerily deserted, transformed into a silent and shadowy expanse. Slipping past security unnoticed, he navigated the grounds with careful determination. As he approached Tilikum's enclosure, the path grew dim, lit only by faint overhead lights. The tank loomed ahead, an enormous shadowy abyss. The only sounds were the low hum of machinery and the gentle sloshing of water against the tank walls, a deceptive calm before the events that would soon unfold. Standing at the edge, Duke stripped down to his shorts. The night air was cool against his skin, but he felt no hesitation. With a deep breath, he climbed over the barrier and slipped into the water. The surface rippled briefly before settling, leaving nothing but silence. Unbeknownst to Dukes, Tilikum was far from dormant. Beneath the water, the orca stirred, alerted by the disturbance. Years of captivity had dulled Tilikum's connection to the wild, but his instincts remained intact. His massive body moved gracefully through the water, his dark eyes fixated on the figure above. At first, Dukes floated calmly, his movements cautious as he adjusted to the cool water. The tank felt larger than it appeared from the outside, the depths stretching into an unnerving darkness. But as he drifted, a shadow emerged beneath him. Tilikum's presence was immense, his bulk cutting through the water with quiet precision. Dukes was likely unaware of the danger until it was too late. The attack was swift. Tilikum surged upward like a freight train, ramming into Dukes with crushing force. The impact shattered his ribs, leaving him stunned and helpless. Against 12,000 pounds of raw power, survival was impossible. As the water erupted in a chaotic frenzy, Tilikum's jaws clamped down on Dukes in an unexpected place, his scrotum. With a powerful grip, the orca dragged him beneath the surface, pulling him deeper into the tank. The water churned violently as Tilikum thrashed, his movements a chilling combination of instinct and aggression. Within moments, the water stilled again. Dukes' body floated lifelessly as Tilikum circled beneath him, nudging the figure as if trying to make sense of what had occurred. The next morning brought the discovery. Trainers arriving for the day's preparations found the scene horrific. Floating in the tank was the battered body of Daniel Dukes, his injuries severe and unmistakable. It was clear he had met a violent end. The orca's immense jaws had left deep wounds, and the evidence pointed to an attack of overwhelming force. The news spread quickly, leaving the public in shock. Questions swirled around how Dukes had managed to evade security and why he had entered the tank in the first place. Investigators pieced together his actions, uncovering a mix of wanderlust and dangerous curiosity that had led him to the enclosure. Tilikum's role in the incident reignited a firestorm of debate. This was not the first death associated with the orca. His history included other incidents that had raised concerns about his captivity. Critics argued that years of confinement had fostered aggression in the animal, turning a once majestic predator into a ticking time bomb. For SeaWorld, the tragedy was a public relations nightmare. The park faced renewed scrutiny over its practices, with activists pointing to Tilikum's violent history as evidence of the dangers of captivity. Yet, for all the outrage, the central question remained unanswered. What had driven Daniel Dukes to such a reckless act? Candu had been captured from her home in the wild waters off Iceland in 1977 when she was just a calf. Her capture, like that of many other orcas, was a traumatic ordeal. Orcas are known for their strong familial bonds, and the process of separating young orcas from their pods was cruel and violent. A team of experts located Kandu's pod through air surveillance, and boats were sent out to surround the orcas, slowly guiding them into a smaller area. Nets were used to separate the young orca from the rest of her pod, and she was captured, transported in a net on a boat, and sent to a new life in captivity. The name Kandu was chosen by her captors, acknowledging the cultural importance of orcas to indigenous communities in the Salish region. Kandu was the first taken to Marine World Africa USA in California before being transferred to Six Flags Over Georgia and then Ontario Place Marine in Toronto. During this time, orcas were frequently moved between parks as part of a business arrangement. Eventually, she went to SeaWorld San Diego, where she would become a star. To the public, Kandu's performances were the pinnacle of orca behavior, showcasing their intelligence, strength, and beauty. But beneath the surface, her life in captivity was marked by immense struggles. Captive orcas, especially those like Kandu, often displayed erratic behaviors, a direct result of confinement in artificial enclosures that fell far short of the vast ocean they were meant to inhabit. Kandu's bond with her trainers was undeniable. She was quick to learn the tricks, her body agile and graceful as she performed stunning flips, jumps, and synchronized movements with the other orcas. However, this bond, though crucial for her training, masked a growing unrest within her. The tight spaces, the lack of freedom, and the loss of family had begun to take their toll. Kandu's distress became particularly evident after the birth of her first calf in 1986. The calf, named Winston, was stillborn, a loss that weighed heavily on the orca. Though she continued to perform, she was visibly disturbed and her behavior became more unpredictable. A year later, Kandu gave birth to another calf, a female named Orchid. The bond between mother and daughter was immediate, but so too was the growing tension with the other orcas, particularly Corky. Kandu's protective instincts toward Orchid were sharp and she became more territorial. By the time of the August 21st performance, Kandu's aggression had reached a boiling point. The show was meant to feature Kandu and Corky in a synchronized performance, but as the crowd looked on, Kandu's behavior grew erratic. Kandu, agitated by Corky's closeness to Orchid, began to exhibit signs of dominance. In the wild, orcas established their place in the pod through complex social interactions, but here the confines of captivity had pushed Kandu's natural instincts to the edge. The performance meant to showcase the orca's beauty turned into a disturbing display of aggression. Kandu attempted to assert her dominance over Corky through a behavior known as raking, a tactic used by orcas in the wild to establish authority. It was a violent act, scratching at Corky with her teeth in an attempt to overpower her. But Kandu miscalculated. Corky was larger, heavier, and more experienced. Kandu lunged and tragically missed her target, instead hitting the concrete wall of the pool with tremendous force. The sound of impact echoed through the arena, and the audience fell silent. Kandu's upper jaw was fractured and an artery was severed. Blood began to spurt from her blowhole, a horrifying sight for the spectators. In the panic that followed, SeaWorld staff immediately rushed to remove the orcas from the stage. The audience was ushered out of the stadium and Kandu was moved to a back pool, accompanied by her calf Orchid. Kandu's injuries proved to be fatal. Despite the immediate response, the blood loss was immense, and after 45 minutes of struggle, she succumbed to her wounds. In her final moments, Kandu remained by Orchid's side, her maternal bond unbroken. Even as her strength faded, she stayed close to her daughter as if offering her comfort and protection one last time. Her life was cut tragically short in the very place that had once been her stage, leaving behind a poignant legacy of love and loss. The death of Kandu was a pivotal moment in the history of SeaWorld and animal entertainment. It was a tragedy that raised questions that would go unanswered for years. Was Kandu's death simply a result of a tragic accident, or was it an inevitable consequence of captivity? In the aftermath, it was revealed that Can-Do had exhibited aggressive behavior on several occasions prior to the incident. She had snapped at trainers and displayed hostility toward other orcas, behaviors that are not typical for orcas in the wild. On March 4, 1987, Can-Do was filmed slamming into a trainer, dragging him to the bottom of the pool, an incident that highlighted the growing issues with her behavior. In the years following Can-Do's death, SeaWorld continued its orca performances despite growing public scrutiny. The park maintained that their orcas were well cared for, with teams of veterinarians and trainers working to ensure their health. Can-Do's tragic story is just one of many, highlighting the physical and emotional toll captivity takes on orcas. July 18, 2010 began as a typical summer day in Santa Barbara, California. The sun shone over Pacific Horizons Marine Park, where families gathered for the afternoon's performance. The crowd eagerly awaited the Orca show, with Boreas, the park's 21-foot star, ready to perform. Known for his sleek black and white markings and powerful movements, Boreas was the main attraction, captivating the audience with his grace. Yet, despite the excitement, something that would soon shatter the illusion of control. Pacific Horizons Marine Park had been founded in 1992 by Robert Layton. Initially focused on educational exhibits and marine life rescue, Layton's vision was to create a more intimate connection between visitors and the ocean. However, as competition grew, the park expanded its attractions in the early 2000s to remain competitive. By 2005, it had rebranded itself as a premier destination, securing major investments and bringing in larger, more dramatic exhibits. The park's new star was Boreas, a 21-foot male orca. Boreas, marketed as the largest and most majestic orca on the West Coast, quickly became the centerpiece of the park's growing appeal. Born in 1992 off the coast of Norway, Boreas was captured at the age of 5, torn from his pod, and sold into captivity. Life in confinement proved difficult for him, and signs of his distress were evident from the start. Researchers noted his unnatural vocalizations and periods of isolation, suggesting he had never fully adjusted to life in captivity. Despite these signs, Pacific Horizons pushed Boreas to perform, and his breathtaking breaches and graceful movements made him the star attraction, drawing in crowds who marveled at his power and beauty. Yet, beneath his polished performances, the tension between his wild instincts and life in captivity continued to grow. At the heart of Pacific Horizons' success was Zane Marston, a 35-year-old marine biologist and trainer who had grown up surrounded by the park's exhibits and animals. Drawn to marine life from an early age, Zane had spent years shadowing trainers, learning the ins and outs of animal care and performance. His deep connection to the park was personal, as he had always felt a sense of duty to his uncle Robert Layton, the park's founder. Zane's natural talent with marine animals and his passion for conservation made him the perfect fit for training Boreas, the park's star orca. Over the years, Zane developed a unique bond with Boreas, often referring to the orca not just as a performer, but as a friend and partner, a connection that became the foundation of their many successful performances. But by 2009, cracks began to appear in Boreas's behavior. Trainers noticed signs of agitation, tail slapping, refusal to perform, and episodes of vocal distress that suggested the orca was struggling. Zane, concerned for Boreas's well-being, recommended reducing his workload and giving him more time for enrichment. However, these concerns were dismissed by the park's management, who were more focused on maintaining high visitor numbers and profits. Despite these warnings, Zane remained committed to his work with Boreas, believing their bond would keep the situation under control. On July 18, 2010, the stage was set for another performance, one that was supposed to be just like the others. Boreas thrilled the crowd with his stunning breaches and synchronized movements. Zane, confident in their partnership, prepared for the grand finale, and in-water routine where he would swim alongside Boreas, showcasing the bond they had spent years building. But as the act unfolded, something unexpected happened. Without warning, Boreas veered off course, His sleek body, once moving in perfect harmony with Zane's cues, suddenly turned. Zane, submerged in the water beside him, tried to regain control, but Boreas was no longer responding. In an instant, the orca lunged toward him with shocking speed. The audience gasped in disbelief as Boreas's powerful jaws clamped around Zane's torso. He was dragged underwater with terrifying force, his body thrashing in the orca's grip. Zane struggled, but Boreas's hold was unrelenting, dragging him deeper into the tank. The crowd erupted into chaos, unsure if this was part of the act or something much worse. Trainers on the platform screamed for help, throwing buoys and fish into the water in a desperate attempt to distract Boreas. But the orca was consumed by aggression, thrashing violently in the water as Zane's body was tossed like a rag doll. For nearly 2 minutes, the attack continued. Boreas's massive form seemed unstoppable as he dragged Zane deeper into the water, shaking him with brutal force. Zane fought to break free, but his strength was no match for the orcas. The audience, stunned and paralyzed with horror, could only watch as the chaos unfolded. Then, suddenly, Boreas released Zane, and his limp body floated to the surface. Divers scrambled into the water, pulling Zane from the tank, but it was too late. His injuries were catastrophic: fractured ribs, a punctured lung, and severe internal bleeding. Medics rushed to his side, performing CPR at the edge of the tank, but it was clear that the damage was irreparable. Zane was pronounced dead at the scene. The aftermath of Zane's death was swift and devastating. Critics accused Pacific Horizons of negligence, pointing to ignored warnings about Boreas's behavior. Animal rights groups seized on the tragedy, using it to fuel their campaigns against the captivity of orcas. Protests erupted outside the park, calling for justice and demanding an end to the exploitation of marine mammals. Zane's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit, revealing internal communications that showed Zane's concerns had been dismissed by management. The lawsuit was settled, but the damage to the park's reputation was irreparable. Within a year, Pacific Horizons closed its doors for good, and Boreas was relocated to a marine sanctuary in Iceland, where he could live freely. The incident had lasting effects on the industry, reigniting the debate over the ethics of keeping orcas in captivity. Zane's bond with Boreas ended in a violent outburst. In 1965, the world of marine entertainment took a dark turn when Ted Griffin, the owner of the Seattle Marine Aquarium, captured a wild killer whale. This act marked the beginning of a troubling relationship between humans and these magnificent creatures. The crowds flocked to see the spectacle, their excitement palpable as they marveled at the orca's power and grace. However, behind the scenes, a chilling reality unfolded. Within a year, the whale succumbed to the immense stress of captivity, a haunting reminder of the cost of entertainment. Griffin, undeterred by the tragedy, recognized a lucrative opportunity. He transformed the act of capturing orcas into a thriving business model, one that would cast a long shadow over the industry for decades. The methods of capturing these majestic creatures were harrowing. Explosives separated young orcas from their families, creating chaos in the water. Griffin's crew plunged into the turmoil, using massive nets to drag the terrified animals hundreds of miles to shore. The haunting cries of the family members left behind echoed through the ocean, a heart-wrenching testament to the pain inflicted by these captures. But the true tragedy was just beginning. Killer whales are highly intelligent and social animals. In the wild, they form tight-knit family groups, often remaining with their mothers for life. Their deep bonds and complex communication reflect an emotional capacity that few can fathom. Yet, the consequences of captivity began to reveal a darker side to their nature. In 1978, an orca named Kasatka was captured off the coast of Iceland, a young star who dazzled audiences at SeaWorld. However, as the years passed, captivity wore down her spirit. Early signs of aggression emerged, a predictable response from an animal torn from her family and thrust into confinement. As time went on, the tragic stories of orcas in captivity multiplied. Reports surfaced detailing the inhumane conditions these majestic creatures endured. Trainers like Ken Peters, who worked closely with Kasatka, began to notice the toll it was taking on them both. Ken had dedicated his life to training orcas, viewing them as partners in performance. Yet he could no longer ignore the growing risk. Kasatka had bitten him twice, once in 1993 and again in 1999. Each time he dismissed it as a moment of misunderstanding, a miscommunication between species. Their bond felt profound, and he often marveled at the intelligence of these animals, believing that their connection could overcome the risks. Then came November 30th, 2006, a day that would shatter that illusion. As Ken dove into the water for a routine performance, the anticipation in the audience filled the air. They had come to see a show, but what unfolded was a nightmare. As Ken waited for Kasatka's familiar nudge, he felt a sudden jolt that yanked him beneath the surface. Panic surged through the crowd as they realized something was terribly wrong. Staff members rushed to the edge of the pool, shouting commands, but Kasatka was relentless, dragging Ken deeper into the murky water. Beneath the surface, Ken fought to stay calm, but fear gripped him as he struggled against the powerful orca. He could feel the pressure building in his ears, the weight of the water pressing down on him. Kasatka's grip tightened, her teeth sinking into his foot. Time slowed as Ken's mind raced. This was a moment he had long dreaded. Would this be the end? Instinctively, he reached out, stroking her gently, trying to connect with her. He knew he was at her mercy, and if she turned on him, it would be over in an instant. Then, as if sensing his desperation, Kasatka began to swim toward the surface. Ken gasped for air as she released him, slightly, but still held him tightly. The crowd erupted into chaos. He realized he had to fight for his life. As they broke the surface, he heard frantic calls from staff members above, desperately trying to coax Kasatka away. He struggled, summoning every ounce of strength he had to escape her grip. Each moment felt like an eternity. Finally, the staff lowered a net into the water. Ken swam with all his might, panic surging through him. As Kasatka surfaced again, he whispered her name, hoping to reach her with the bond they had built. Miraculously, she responded, swimming toward the net. Seizing the moment, Ken propelled himself toward the edge of the pool, scrambling out onto the concrete, his heart racing. Emerging battered with puncture wounds and a broken foot, Ken's survival felt like a small miracle amid the chaos. The aftermath sent shockwaves through SeaWorld and ignited fierce debates about the ethics of keeping orcas in captivity. Why hadn't anyone seen this coming? Was the industry prepared to confront the consequences of their actions? Kasatka's story didn't end with the attack. She passed away on August 15, 2017 at the age of 41 due to a persistent lung infection attributed to her years in captivity. At her death, she was the oldest orca in captivity, a bittersweet title that highlighted the scars left by a life spent in confinement. Following her passing, SeaWorld pledged to change its approach to orca care, promising to prioritize their well-being over entertainment. It was 1965 when a remarkable event occurred off the coast of British Columbia near a small town called Namu. A young orca, tangled in a massive salmon net, was pulled from the ocean and into a world far removed from the wild waters he knew. His name was Namu, and his story would soon become one of the most controversial chapters in the history of orca captivity. Namu's life began as a member of the C1 pod, part of the northern resident orca community that had thrived for centuries in the Pacific Northwest. However, fate would soon take a darker turn. Discovered by a fisherman named William Lacobie, Namu was sold to Ted Griffin, the owner of the Seattle Marine Aquarium. Griffin saw a lucrative opportunity, not just to house the orca, but to turn him into the star of large shows, drawing in crowds, earning big money, and selling tickets. And so, Namu's tragic journey from the wild to captivity was set in motion. What followed would both captivate and horrify the world. Upon arriving in Seattle, Namu quickly became the star attraction at Griffin's Aquarium. For the first time, the world had the chance to witness a live orca up close and personal. His playful behavior, his massive size, and his unflinching companionship with Griffin painted a picture of the killer whale as a gentle giant, a stark contrast to the wild and dangerous creatures often depicted in the media. Namu's presence sparked a wave of public fascination, and the once feared orca became a beloved icon. But what the public didn't see was the price Namu paid for this newfound fame. As his popularity grew, so did the pressures to perform. Namu, now confined to a small pen in Seattle's Pier 56, was subjected to daily routines that were far from natural. He was fed 400 pounds of salmon every day, but his captivity took a toll on his health. The once mighty killer whale who had roamed the open sea was now reduced to a spectacle. Still, Namu's bond with Griffin was undeniable. Their connection, at times seemingly telepathic, captured the imagination of millions. But what the public didn't know was the dark reality behind Namu's life in captivity. In 1966, just before the premiere of Namu, My Best Friend, the orca passed away. The film, released that same year, told a heartwarming and idealized story of a man and his heroic orca. It follows marine biologist Hank Donner, who discovers a wounded orca, later named Namu, stranded on the shore of the Pacific Northwest. The plot centers around Hank's fight to protect Namu from local fishermen, who view the orca as a threat to their livelihood. As the townspeople attempt to harm him, Hank swims with Namu to prove the orca's peaceful nature, ultimately earning the trust of both the animal and the town. The film played a significant role in shifting public perceptions of killer whales, casting them as majestic creatures worthy of protection rather than fear. Behind the scenes, however, Namu's life was far darker. An autopsy revealed he had been suffering from several illnesses, including a bacterial infection, skin rashes, and a stomach infection likely caused by sewage runoff in Elliott Bay, where he had been relocated. Namu's death was tragic, not only because of the suffering he endured, but also because it exposed the hidden consequences of human fascination with these animals. While the movie was meant to showcase the bond between Namu and his human counterparts, the reality was far more sinister. The film painted a picture of an orca who willingly played with children, who protected his human friends from harm. But in truth, Namu's life had been anything but idyllic. He was confined to a small pen, isolated from his family, and forced to perform for the entertainment of others. The film's release, which should have been a celebration of Namu's life, was instead overshadowed by the painful reality of his death. The public outpouring of grief following Namu's death was immense. Thousands mourned the loss of the orca who had captured their hearts. However, Namu's death also sparked an important conversation about the ethics of keeping killer whales in captivity. In the years that followed, the world began to question whether the price of human entertainment was worth the suffering of these magnificent creatures. Ted Griffin, who had once seen Namu as a companion, was left to grapple with the consequences of his actions. While he had introduced the world to orcas as intelligent, emotional creatures, he had also played a part in their exploitation. Griffin would later go on to advocate for the release of captive orcas, but the damage had been done. Namu's story had served as a harsh reminder that humans had underestimated the needs and complexities of the animals they sought to control. Today, Namu's name is remembered not just as a movie title, but as a symbol of the change he helped bring about. While the film may have told a fairy tale of a human-orca friendship, the reality of Namu's life was far more complex. His death was a tragic reminder that entertainment should never come at the cost of an animal's well-being. Blue Horizon Oceanic Park, nestled in San Diego, California, stood as a premier marine attraction, renowned for offering more than just its famous orca performances. Visitors were captivated by its cutting-edge aquariums, interactive dolphin experiences, and a vibrant coral reef exhibit. However, the park's true centerpiece was Neptune, a massive 20-foot-long, 10,000-pound male orca whose mesmerizing shows drew thousands of spectators weekly. As the park's biggest star and financial cornerstone, Neptune performed 6 electrifying shows each week, anchoring the park's success and solidifying its reputation as a must-visit destination. But behind the scenes, not everything was as seamless as it appeared. Trainers had reported increasingly erratic behavior from Neptune, who was known to slap his tail against the tank walls and refuse commands. Despite the warnings, Blue Horizon management insisted the show continue, citing the orca's massive contribution to the park's revenue. Maris Ellington, a 27-year-old marine biologist, had worked tirelessly to achieve her position as Neptune's primary handler. Growing up along Oregon's rugged coastline, she developed a deep love for marine life. After earning her degree, Maris joined Blue Horizon, where her care and dedication quickly earned her respect among her colleagues. She took pride in her bond with Neptune, often dismissing concerns about his behavior, convinced she could manage him. However, not everyone shared her optimism. A senior trainer had stepped forward months earlier, expressing serious concerns about Neptune's increasing aggression and isolation. This trainer requested that Neptune be retired or at least removed from performances. Management denied the request, and the trainer, unwilling to participate in what they saw as unsafe conditions, quit in protest. The trainer's warnings would later become a key part of the fallout from the tragedy. By the time of the afternoon performance, Maris had already completed one show earlier that day. The earlier performance had gone smoothly, and the amphitheater was once again filling with excited families and children eager to see Neptune's powerful leaps and synchronized routines. Despite Neptune's erratic behavior in recent months, Maris seemed confident, telling colleagues she felt he was in a good mood today. Trainers reviewed the cues and safety protocols one last time, though a lingering unease hung in the air. As the music swelled and the announcer welcomed the crowd, the show began. Neptune glided into the tank with his characteristic grace, earning cheers from the audience of approximately 500 people. The performance started flawlessly, with Neptune completing his initial routines under Maris's guidance. The crowd roared with approval as he performed a high breach, soaking the front rows with a massive splash. For a moment, it seemed like Neptune was back to his usual self. The finale was the highlight of the show, a synchronized swim between Maris and Neptune, a routine meant to display their bond and the orca's agility. As Maris entered the water, Neptune circled her, his immense black and white body cutting through the clear water. Maris signaled for him to perform a breach beside her, and for a moment it seemed like he would comply. But suddenly, Neptune veered off course. Without warning, he turned and lunged at Maris, his powerful jaws clamping around her midsection. The force of the attack sent her head briefly above the water, and she heard the horrified screams of the audience before Neptune yanked her back under. Trainers on the platform immediately sprang into action, deploying distraction techniques they hoped would calm the orca. Brightly colored buoys and ropes were tossed into the tank, followed by a bucket of fish. Two trainers activated long poles designed to nudge Neptune away, but his thrashing made it impossible to intervene without risking further harm. As Neptune slammed Maris against the tank walls, her limp body broke the surface again, only to be dragged back under moments later. The audience watched in horror, some shielding their children from the gruesome scene, others frozen in disbelief. Neptune finally released her after over a minute of thrashing, and her lifeless body floated to the surface. Rescue divers entered the tank within seconds and pulled her to the deck, where medics worked frantically to revive her. The injuries were catastrophic: multiple fractured ribs, a punctured lung, and severe blunt force trauma to her chest and abdomen. Despite their efforts, Maris was pronounced dead at the scene. The aftermath was chaotic. Guests were evacuated from the park as emergency personnel arrived, and the amphitheater was cordoned off. Within hours, Blue Horizon announced the suspension of all orca shows, a decision that would later become permanent. The tragedy led to significant legal repercussions for Blue Horizon. Maris's parents, devastated by the loss of their only child, filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the park, citing negligence in ignoring repeated warnings about Neptune's aggression and the dangers of isolating him. The lawsuit also highlighted inadequate safety measures and the management's decision to continue performances despite the known risks. The case never reached the courtroom. After extended negotiations, Blue Horizon's management agreed to a significant settlement with Maris's family. While the specific terms remained confidential, the agreement highlighted the park's acknowledgement of responsibility and its desire to protect its public image. As part of the settlement, Blue Horizon also committed to supporting marine conservation initiatives and funding independent research into the mental health of captive orcas, signaling a step toward addressing broader concerns. The tragedy sent shockwaves through the marine park industry, sparking intense debates about orca captivity. Blue Horizon permanently banned orca shows but kept its other attractions, including dolphin encounters, aquariums, and conservation-focused exhibits. However, the loss of its star attraction led to declining attendance and mounting financial struggles. Within a few years, the park filed for bankruptcy and closed its doors. Neptune was relocated to a marine sanctuary in British Columbia, where he could live in a more natural environment. It was July 8, 2002 at SeaWorld San Diego, a place where families gathered to watch marine life perform. Among the trainers was Tamari Tollison, a dedicated 28-year-old who had always dreamed of working with orcas. With years of experience under her belt, she felt a deep connection to the animals, especially two orcas named Orchid and Splash. This day began like any other, with trainers preparing for the afternoon show. Tamari walked to Shamu Stadium feeling the familiar thrill of anticipation. The stadium was packed, families eagerly awaiting the performance. Children pointed excitedly at the water, while parents settled into their seats with cameras in hand. Tamari loved sharing her passion for marine life, educating the audience about the orca's intelligence and grace. However, both orcas had histories that hinted at danger. Splash, originally named Katak, was born with health challenges including epilepsy. In 1995, he suffered a seizure that resulted in severe injuries, including damage to his jaw. Despite his resilience, the scars of his past served as a reminder of the hidden risks in training orcas. Orchid, a hybrid orca, also had a troubled background. Born at SeaWorld, she witnessed her mother's death during a performance, which shaped her behavior. In 2006, she attacked another trainer, pulling him underwater for nearly half a minute. These incidents were often overlooked in favor of entertainment, a horrific mistake that would later prove to be wrong. As the show began, Tamari signaled to Orchid and Splash. The audience watched in awe as the orcas leaped and splashed, demonstrating their training and agility. Each performance was a culmination of countless hours of practice, and Tamari felt immense pride watching her beloved orcas showcase their skills. Splash executed a perfect breach, sending a cascade of water over the edge of the pool, eliciting cheers from the crowd. However, as the routine continued, Tamari sensed a change in the water. The atmosphere shifted, and the behavior of the orcas became increasingly erratic. Orchid and Splash displayed signs of agitation, swimming closer together, creating ripples in the water that spoke of unease. Tamari furrowed her brow, trying to gauge what was troubling them. Perhaps it was the noise from the crowd, or maybe the heat of the day was making them uncomfortable. Determined to maintain control, Tamari attempted to redirect their attention with commands and gestures she had practiced countless times before. But today was different. The orcas seemed unresponsive to her signals, and their movements grew more aggressive. The excitement of the audience shifted to murmurs of confusion and concern. Tamari's heart raced as she watched the orcas circle in the water, their bodies tense and focused on one another. Then, without warning, Orchid lunged up from the water. Tamari barely had time to react as the massive orca clamped down on her foot, dragging her into the pool. A gasp rippled through the crowd, and panic set in as the screams of the audience echoed around the stadium. In an instant, Tamari was submerged, her body caught in the grip of a creature she had devoted her life to training. The water swirled around her as she struggled against the overwhelming force of Orca's bite. Tamari's heart raced as she felt the cold water engulf her. She kicked and thrashed, her screams muffled beneath the surface. It was chaos. The other trainers on the platform shouted, desperately trying to pull her to safety. One trainer, Robin Sheet, recognized the danger and made a quick decision. She rushed to the adjoining pool, releasing a more dominant female orca named Kasaka, hoping the new arrival would disrupt the aggression between Orchid and Tamari. The moment Kasaka entered the tank, the dynamic shifted. Orchid released her grip and Tamari found her way to the surface, gasping for air. She had sustained severe injuries during the attack, including a compound fracture in her forearm. The shock of the incident left her shaken and in pain, but she was alive. As she reached the edge of the pool, fellow trainers pulled her up, their faces pale with fear. Tamari was rushed to the hospital where doctors treated her arm injuries. Medical staff worked quickly to assess the damage. As they treated her, reports of the incident began to emerge, detailing the performance and the unexpected attack that occurred in the water. This incident marked a turning point for SeaWorld. Videos circulated drawing attention to the dangers trainers faced while working with orcas. The event sparked debates about the ethics of keeping such intelligent creatures in captivity for entertainment. Tamari's experience was not just an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a larger issue regarding the treatment of marine mammals. Tamari's recovery was long and painful, with visible scars and lingering emotional trauma. When she returned to SeaWorld, fear and doubt replaced her joy, making her question the safety of her environment and the treatment of the orcas she loved. Despite the trauma, Tamari became a voice for change within the organization. She advocated for revised safety protocols, emphasizing the need for trainers to prioritize their well-being and the well-being of the animals. The attack raised broader questions about the nature of captivity. Advocates argue that orcas like Orchid and Splash deserve to live in environments that mimicked their natural habitats. As time passed, SeaWorld faced increasing scrutiny over its practices. The documentary Blackfish brought national attention to the issues surrounding captive orcas, featuring Tamari's harrowing experience. Public perception shifted, and discussions about the ethics of marine parks gained momentum. While Tamari survived the attack, the scars of that day served as a haunting reminder of the dangers trainers face. Steve Abel was a veteran SeaWorld trainer, known to thousands of visitors at the San Antonio park. Over nearly 2 decades, he formed an impressive bond with the massive orca Kai, captivating audiences with their synchronized movements and trust-filled routines. But on a summer day in 2004, this trust would face its greatest test. A day that started as a routine performance took a sudden and terrifying turn. On July 27th, with the sun rising high over San Antonio, SeaWorld Stadium filled with eager spectators for the Shamu Adventure Show. At the center of this spectacle were Steve and Kai, a 9,000-pound orca stretching 22 feet in length. The routine was carefully crafted over years of training, perfected in countless rehearsals. Steve, with 17 years of experience, knew Kai's every move and had fostered a strong connection with him. Today seemed like any other show, until it wasn't. Steve had long been admired by fans and colleagues alike, known for his calm demeanor and near instinctive understanding of marine animals. Kai, in turn, had become a fixture in these performances, often mesmerizing the crowd with his athletic displays. Despite the grandeur, the risks were always present, lurking just beneath the surface. Kai, a fully grown orca, possessed an immense untamed strength, and while years of training allowed Steve to develop a rapport with the animal, he understood the delicate line he walked with each show. Would today be the day that line was crossed? As the performance began, Steve entered the tank, moving in sync with Kai. The orca executed flips and spins with ease, eliciting cheers from the audience. Every maneuver seemed routine, every interaction calculated. But then, with no apparent provocation, Kai's behavior changed. Steve gave a command, but instead of complying, Kai paused. Steve tried to redirect him with a familiar signal, but the orca's gaze had turned unreadable, his movements suddenly unpredictable. Suddenly, Kai's demeanor shifted. With a swift, unrestrained surge, he charged at Steve, sending waves crashing against the sides of the tank. The impact hit like a tidal wave, and Steve, momentarily stunned, struggled to regain his balance. For a brief, harrowing moment, the audience thought this might be part of the performance, but the intensity of Kai's movements told a different story. The orca's strikes grew more forceful, his powerful body slamming into Steve, who fought to stay above the waterline. Kai seized Steve, holding him underwater. In an instant, the orca launched him upward only to slam him back down, each motion displaying Kai's immense strength. Steve's training instincts engaged as he struggled to stay calm, his muscles straining to keep his head above water. The orca's 9,000-pound frame turned into a powerful force, tossing Steve around as if he weighed nothing. At the pool's edge, fellow trainers sprang into action, slapping the water and throwing fish in desperate attempts to draw Kai's attention. The atmosphere buzzed with tension as they frantically signaled, trying every emergency tactic to reach him. Yet, Kai, later described as overstimulated, remained beyond their cues, his focus locked solely on Steve. Would any of their efforts break through the powerful orca's single-minded intensity? With a surge of adrenaline, Steve managed to free himself briefly, only for Kai to rush at him again, dragging him to the tank's depths. Each brutal slam echoed underwater, leaving Steve battered and breathless. The audience, horrified, sat in stunned silence, many covering their eyes, unable to bear what felt like Steve's final moments. But through sheer will, Steve held on, using his years of experience to stay still whenever Kai let go, avoiding movements that might trigger another attack. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Kai's aggression eased. As Steve pulled himself from the tank, the silence was broken by scattered gasps and murmurs from the stunned audience. Trainers rushed to his side, steadying him as he caught his breath, his body bearing the visible marks of the ordeal. The reality of what had just unfolded set in, and SeaWorld staff quickly ushered the crowd away, keenly aware of the gravity of the incident. In the aftermath of Steve's encounter with Kai, SeaWorld took immediate steps to reevaluate its protocols and policies. Close contact interactions with Kai were permanently suspended, and the incident added fuel to the growing debate over orca captivity. Jessica Radcliffe seemed destined for a career working with marine animals. Her father, a marine biologist specializing in cetaceans, introduced her to the wonders of the ocean at a young age. Growing up near the Pacific coast, Jessica often accompanied him on research trips, watching in awe as he studied dolphins and whales. Her fascination grew stronger after attending her first orca show at Ocean Haven Marine Park, a facility inspired by the success of SeaWorld and quickly gaining fame near Monterey, California. From that moment, Jessica was determined to become an orca trainer. At just 19, Jessica began working at Ocean Haven, starting as an intern while pursuing a degree in marine biology. Her dedication and natural talent quickly set her apart, and within a year she secured a permanent position as part of the training team. By 21, Jessica had achieved what few her age could claim. She had become the lead trainer for Makalo, the park's largest and most popular orca. At 22 feet long and weighing nearly 12,000 pounds, Makalo was the centerpiece of Ocean Haven's 6 weekly orca shows, drawing thousands of visitors each week. Jessica's bond with Makalo was remarkable, with many colleagues noting their unique connection. While other trainers found Makalo challenging at times, Jessica seemed to bring out the best in him. However, troubling signs began to emerge. Makalo started exhibiting erratic behavior, including increased aggression during feeding sessions, refusal to perform commands, and tail slapping against the tank walls. On one occasion, Makalo lunged at a trainer during feeding, forcing them to leap back from the tank. Yet, around Jessica, Makalo remained calm and cooperative, responding to her commands with precision. Believing she had a special ability to manage Makalo, park management decided she should lead all shows involving him, despite concerns raised by other staff members. On the day of a headline show, Ocean Haven was packed with eager visitors. Families filled the stands, children clutching cotton candy as they eagerly awaited the performance. The buzz of excitement was contagious as the announcer's voice boomed over the speakers, introducing Jessica and Makalo to roaring applause. Jessica stepped onto the platform with a confidence that belied her years, flashing a bright smile at the audience before signaling Makalo to begin. The performance began smoothly, with Makalo completing his routines flawlessly under Jessica's guidance. The orca's massive dorsal fin sliced through the water as he performed each move with precision, following her commands without hesitation. The crowd erupted in applause when Makalo delivered a breathtaking breach, launching his enormous body out of the water and crashing back down in a spectacular splash that drenched the front rows. Children squealed with delight as waves of water surged into the audience, and parents joined in the applause, captivated by the connection between Jessica and the majestic orca. The finale involved Jessica entering the tank for a synchronized swim routine with Makalo, a signature act that thrilled audiences. As Jessica dove into the water, Makalo circled her in what appeared to be a playful manner. But suddenly, without warning, Makalo lunged, clamping his powerful jaws around Jessica's upper torso. The impact was instant and ferocious, knocking the wind out of her. Gasps and screams erupted from the crowd as they watched Makalo thrash her in the water. The trainers on the platform immediately sprang into action. Emergency signals were triggered and distraction techniques were deployed. They threw buoys, ropes, and even fish into the tank, desperately trying to draw Makalo's attention away from Jessica. Two trainers prepared to enter the water with poles to attempt a rescue, but the ferocity of Makalo's movements made it impossible to safely intervene. Jessica was held underwater for over a minute as Makalo twisted and thrashed, his immense strength leaving her no chance to escape. The orca's powerful jaws caused catastrophic internal injuries, including fractured ribs, a punctured lung, and massive trauma to her chest. Blood clouded the water as Jessica's limp body was finally released, floating to the surface. Rescue divers pulled Jessica from the tank within seconds, but the damage was too severe. Attempts to resuscitate her on the pool deck failed, and she was pronounced dead at the scene. Her injuries were later confirmed to include severe blunt force trauma and drowning. As the horrifying scene unfolded, staff worked frantically to evacuate the audience. Panicked cries echoed through the stands as parents shielded their children from the gruesome sight. Many young visitors, some clutching souvenirs from the show, were left visibly traumatized. Several families hurried out of the stadium while others stood frozen in shock, unable to process the tragedy they had just witnessed. The tragedy sent shockwaves through Ocean Haven and the marine park industry at large. Jessica was widely regarded as one of the most skilled and compassionate trainers at the park, with an unparalleled bond with Makalo. Her death left many questioning how such a tragedy could happen, especially with someone who had the closest relationship to the orca. Was it simply a case of Makalo's wild instincts taking over, or were there warning signs that the park failed to address? Colleagues and visitors mourned Jessica as a dedicated trainer whose life revolved around her love for marine animals. Her family held a private memorial service near the ocean where they remembered her passion, her courage, and her devotion to Makalo. But her death also sparked outrage and debate. Could Ocean Haven have done more to prevent this? Should Makalo's previous erratic behavior had been taken more seriously? And most importantly, should orcas even be kept in captivity at all? Following the incident, Ocean Haven Marine Park permanently shut its gates. The decision was made to relocate Makalo to a newly established marine sanctuary off the coast of Washington State, where he could live out the rest of his life in an enclosed ocean environment with minimal human interaction. While it could never replace the vastness of the open ocean, the sanctuary provided Makalo a chance to live more naturally away from the pressures of performing. The tragic loss of Jessica opened many eyes to the dangers of working with orcas. Hugo's story unfolds with a somber inevitability, beginning as he took his first breath in the open ocean of the Pacific Northwest. It was 1965, and Hugo was born into a pod of southern resident killer whales, roaming vast waters, thriving in the rhythms of the wild. Little could he know that just 3 years later, his life would forever be altered, taken from his family and his ocean home. Hugo's capture occurred in 1968 in the cold waters of Warren Bay, Washington. A powerful orca calf, only 3 years old, he was wrested from his family's side and transported over 3,000 miles to a world far removed from the one he knew. This concrete enclosure, named the Celebrity Bowl, would be Hugo's new reality. Here, he became a spectacle, a captive performer for thousands of visitors who marveled at his size and strength, unaware of the confinement and isolation eating away at his spirit. The Celebrity Bowl was no substitute for the open ocean. Hugo's tank was small, his world reduced to a fraction of what his kind was meant to roam. Each performance drew in eager crowds, captivated by the sight of Hugo, a glimpse of the ocean's wild majesty behind glass. But what they didn't see was the desperation building within him. Richard O'Barry, Hugo's trainer, saw the impact of captivity firsthand. In Behind the Dolphin Smile, he captured the heartbreaking scene. When I fed Hugo, his tail would be lying on the bottom and his head would be completely out of the water. It was pathetic. They wanted me to train him. I refused and left in disgust. Though Hugo became a staple of the aquarium, each show masked a painful truth. Those quirks weren't for entertainment. They were signs of a mind fraying under strain. With every passing day, Hugo grew closer to the breaking point, an outcome that would shock everyone, yet in some way felt tragically inevitable. In the early 1970s, the aquarium paired Hugo with a new companion, Lolita, another orca taken from the ocean, who had similarly lost her family to captivity. Their bond was undeniable. Lolita brought Hugo the comfort of companionship he had long missed, and the two orcas soon became inseparable. Together, they became the stars of the aquarium, captivating audiences with their graceful maneuvers and synchronized routines. But while the crowds cheered, Hugo's spirit remained restless. He had not forgotten the freedom of his former life. How much could one animal endure before reaching its breaking point? As the years wore on, Hugo's frustration boiled over into violent outbursts. His massive body would slam into the tank walls, raising alarms among staff and trainers, but still no one took action to address the deeper issues. In 1970, during what should have been a routine training session, Hugo lashed out. A trainer made the risky choice of reaching into his mouth, and Hugo clamped down, inflicting injuries that required 10 stitches. The aggression didn't stop there. In 1971, Hugo smashed his head so hard against the tank's plastic wall that it fractured, leaving him with a severe injury on his snout. Staff patched the wound, yet within a week the stitches came undone, leaving a permanent depression. A physical reminder of the damage captivity was inflicting on him. How much longer could Hugo sustain this agony before his spirit shattered completely? In 1972, another trainer at the aquarium recalled Hugo's aggression. Max Jacks described how Hugo, once gentle, had begun forcefully bumping into staff and visitors, showing little of his former tolerance. Hugo's mental state continued to decline, his behavior growing more erratic. The aquarium staff brushed off each incident as an unfortunate consequence of keeping large, intelligent predators in confinement. But Hugo's actions spoke of a desperation that no handler could fully comprehend. By the end of the decade, the signs of Hugo's deteriorating sanity were clear. The playful, powerful orca was now seen more often slamming his head against the walls of his tank than performing stunts. This behavior became routine, a harrowing ritual of self-destruction that escalated in intensity. Yet, the aquarium pressed on, promoting Hugo and Lolita as major attractions, drawing in crowds unaware of the suffering behind their performances. In early 1980, Hugo's condition began to show clear signs of deterioration. His usual energy faded, replaced by a sluggishness that trainers and spectators alike couldn't ignore. But the aquarium's management dismissed it, pushing Hugo to continue his training without any medical checkups. On March 4, 1980, during a routine rehearsal with Lolita, Hugo suddenly stopped moving. He drifted to the tank's surface, motionless as if in a deep sleep. Trainers called out to him, tossing bait into the water, but he didn't respond. What began as an ordinary day in the tank had shifted into a gut-wrenching realization. Hugo, the beloved orca who had captivated thousands, was gone. Was it simply his time, or did captivity push Hugo to his breaking point? An autopsy later confirmed that Hugo had died from a brain aneurysm, a fatal condition likely brought on by years of ramming his head against the tank walls. While the aquarium dismissed his death as an isolated case, animal activists and former trainers knew better. To them, Hugo's death was a chilling reminder of the mental and physical toll captivity took on him. Despite this tragedy, the aquarium continued its operations, quietly disposing of Hugo's body, rumored to have been discarded in a local landfill. The show went on, with Lolita stepping into the spotlight, left to endure captivity's silent weight alone. It was a crisp, breezy morning on July 6, 1991 in San Diego, California. The SeaWorld Park, normally bustling with families and eager tourists, seemed quieter than usual as the sounds of excited chatter and laughter filled the air. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a soft glow over the crowd, while the occasional call of a distant seagull added to the peaceful ambiance. Visitors milled about, absorbing the sights and sounds of the ocean, unaware that the performance they were about to witness would shatter the tranquil mood and lead to a tragic event that would leave a permanent scar on the park's legacy. Jonathan Smith, a 20-year-old marine animal trainer, stood backstage near the massive Orca tank. He had always dreamed of working with marine animals, and at such a young age, his dream had come true. Jonathan had recently been hired at SeaWorld, and this performance would be his first time working with Can-Do, one of the park's most famous orcas. He had heard the whispers from the other trainers about Can-Do's unpredictable behavior, but they reassured him that it was just part of the nature of working with such powerful creatures. But Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling that something was different today. He was about to face Can-Do in the water, but he hadn't fully realized the risk he was about to take. Can-Do, a 19-foot orca, was one of SeaWorld's prized animals. Born in the wild off the coast of Iceland in 1977, she was captured at the age of 3 and brought to the park. Her size and strength made her a staple of the shows at SeaWorld, where she had dazzled audiences with her agility and beauty. But beneath her mesmerizing exterior, Can-Do harbored signs of distress. The years spent in captivity had begun to take a toll on her behavior. Over time, her interactions with the trainers became more unpredictable. Moments of aggression and erratic movements were becoming more frequent, especially when it was time for her to perform. Her behavior had become a known risk, though the park continued to push her into performances, as she was one of their top attractions. Jonathan had trained with orcas before, but never one as large and potentially dangerous as Can-Do. Despite his nerves, he trusted the safety protocols and the guidance of his senior trainers, who assured him everything would go smoothly. As the show began, everything seemed normal. Can-Do performed her tricks with her usual grace, thrilling the audience as she breached the surface of the tank, sending water cascading through the air. Jonathan, standing at the edge of the tank, gave her the signals, and Can-Do obeyed with the precision she had become known for. The crowd cheered as the routine went on, but as the performance neared its end and it was time for Jonathan to enter the water with Can-Do for the final act, something began to shift. Candu's movements became less fluid, more erratic. Her tail slapped against the water with an intensity that sent ripples across the tank. When Jonathan entered the water beside Candu, the orca circled him in an unsettling way, her eyes no longer meeting his, but darting around as if searching for something. Jonathan signaled for the breach the moment when Candu would rise above him, but instead she swam past him, ignoring his cues. Candu swam in tight circles, her body tense and her movements jarring. He repeated the signal more firmly this time, but Candu didn't respond. Suddenly, Candu swam directly at Jonathan. The audience gasped as Candu's massive body slammed into him, knocking him off his feet. Her teeth sank into his arm with terrifying force, dragging him beneath the surface. The water around them churned violently as Candu thrashed Jonathan, her powerful jaws clamping down on his body. Jonathan's attempts to break free were futile against the strength of the orca. He was trapped, unable to escape the grip of the animal that moments before had been his partner in the show. The crowd watched in frozen horror, their gasps turning to screams as they realized this was no longer part of the act. For several minutes, Jonathan was pulled and slammed against the tank walls. Candu's grip did not relent, and another orca, Keanu, joined the attack, further complicating the desperate scene. The show's other trainers screamed for help, tossing buoy rings and anything they could find into the water. But Candu seemed oblivious to their efforts, focused solely on the young trainer she had trapped. Blood began to cloud the water, and it became clear that the situation was dire. When Candu finally released Jonathan, his limp body floated to the surface unconscious. The scene was chaotic. Divers plunged into the tank, pulling Jonathan to safety, but the damage had been done. Paramedics rushed to the scene, performing CPR as Jonathan was quickly transported to a nearby hospital. Jonathan survived the incident, but suffered serious injuries, including bruised ribs, internal organ damage, and a laceration to his liver caused by Candu's jaws. He was hospitalized for 9 days following the attack. In the aftermath of the attack, Jonathan filed a lawsuit against SeaWorld, alleging negligence and seeking damages for the harm caused by Candu and the other orca involved. The lawsuit highlighted the park's failure to address the growing signs of aggression in the orcas and the risks associated with their captivity. Jonathan claimed that despite the known risks, SeaWorld had allowed him to participate in a performance with Candu without proper safeguards or training for handling such aggressive behavior. The lawsuit was settled out of court, but the incident brought significant attention to the safety of trainers and the ethics of orca captivity. The crowd at SeaWorld Orlando leaned forward in their seats, eyes fixed on Dawn Brancheau as she prepared to interact with Tilikum, the massive orca she'd trained for years. Everything seemed in place: the sunlit water, Dawn's confident smile, the rhythmic rise of Tilikum's dorsal fin as he swam nearby. But just beneath that calm surface, an unpredictable force lay waiting. And as Dawn signaled to Tilikum, no one in the crowd could have guessed that they were seconds away from witnessing a tragedy that would forever alter the world of marine shows. Dawn Brancheau had dreamed of working with orcas ever since she was 10. A family trip to SeaWorld had changed her life, igniting a passion for these immense, graceful creatures. Her journey from that wide-eyed little girl to one of SeaWorld's star trainers spanned years of dedication, education, and sheer hard work. Now, as a leading figure in SeaWorld's Shamu show, she'd become a face of the park, respected for her skill and the close bond she had with the orcas. For more than 16 years, Dawn had been a beloved trainer, her performances drawing massive crowds, each captivated by her seeming harmony with some of the ocean's most formidable animals. But among the orcas, Tilikum was different. Standing over 22 feet long and weighing nearly 12,000 pounds, he was the largest orca in captivity. His history was dark, marred by troubling incidents, yet he had spent years with SeaWorld, part of their most popular shows. With a history stretching back to the icy waters off Iceland, Tilikum had been captured as a 2-year-old and transported into a world confined by walls and schedules. Though his size made him impressive to watch, it also brought challenges, as he struggled with limited space and social isolation from other orcas. Despite his reputation, Don had worked closely with him for years, building a careful routine and familiarity that made their bond appear seamless to onlookers. It was February 24, 2010, during SeaWorld's popular Dine with Shamu event. Dawn lay flat on her stomach by the tank's edge, signaling Tilikum to approach. It was a routine she'd practiced hundreds of times, her long ponytail trailing down, a signal he recognized well. To the audience, it was another thrilling moment, a breathtaking glimpse into the connection between human and creature. But in a sudden, chilling twist, the familiar turned deadly. Without warning, Tilikum grabbed Dawn's ponytail in his jaws and yanked her into the water. A gasp spread through the audience, some assuming it was part of the show, others feeling a chill of unease. Trainers watching from nearby knew immediately something was wrong. Tilikum's grip was unyielding as he pulled Dawn deeper, his massive body moving with a raw power that was impossible to counter. Dawn fought with everything she had, her experience and strength no match for the orca's sheer force. As she struggled to surface, Tilikum slammed her against the walls of the tank, his actions relentless and terrifying. Every command and cue thrown his way went ignored, the signals he'd responded to countless times seeming to fall on deaf ears. Tilikum was beyond reach, lost to a primal instinct that had been held at bay for years. Each second became an agonizing eternity as Dawn tried to break free, only to be pulled back, tossed, and battered. The onlookers' shock turned to horror as the water grew red and cries began to fill the stadium. Trainers desperately worked to distract Tilikum, slapping the water and throwing emergency signals. But he wouldn't release his grip, locked in a terrifying fury. Dawn's injuries were catastrophic. In those brutal moments, her spine was severed, her ribs broken, and her left arm and scalp torn. Her body went limp, yet Tilikum continued to thrash her, his hold unyielding even as she was beyond help. It took over 30 minutes to finally retrieve her body. The horrified crowd, paralyzed by shock, began to realize they were witnessing one of the darkest moments in SeaWorld's history. A moment that would forever alter the world of marine animal entertainment. As Dawn's lifeless body was finally retrieved from the tank, a stunned silence spread through the stadium, interrupted only by quiet sobs from witnesses and murmurs from onlookers. Trainers, many who had known Dawn for years, stood shaken, grieving the loss of a beloved colleague. In the hours that followed, SeaWorld staff moved swiftly to close the park, guiding guests out and setting up barriers around the area. Emergency responders arrived, and officials from the Occupational Safety and Health Administration launched an investigation, beginning a deeper scrutiny that would shake the marine park industry. The public reacted immediately. News outlets worldwide reported on Dawn's tragic end, and as details emerged, the pattern of incidents became undeniable. For as long as she could remember, Emily Cadeau had been captivated by the powerful, enigmatic presence of orcas. Each summer, she would visit Blue Waters Marine Park, drawn by the deep bond between trainers and the ocean's largest predators. Over the years, her bedroom walls became covered with posters of animals she loved, and her fascination grew stronger with each visit. Her childhood dream was clear. One day, she would stand among her heroes, working side by side with these majestic creatures. Blue Waters Marine Park was a renowned facility that showcased the beauty of marine life while championing conservation. Through captivating performances and interactive exhibits, it inspired countless children to dream big and nurtured a passion for marine animals, encouraging many to pursue careers in marine biology and animal training. Emily was one of those children. her dreams shaped by the wonders she witnessed there. Now, at 28, she had achieved her dream, standing on the platform at Blue Waters Marine Park where her mentors had once stood. With nearly a decade of experience, she was now one of the park's most skilled trainers. Her bond with Nayar, the park's star orca, was strong, built on countless hours of practice, patience, and trust. Blue Waters felt more like a home to Emily than any place on land. Her friends often joked that she practically lived at the park, and in truth it was almost accurate. Nayar in particular was at the center of her world. However, in recent weeks, Emily had noticed subtle changes in Nayar's behavior. It wasn't anything overt, just small signs that only someone who knew her well would catch. Nayar seemed slightly more restless and somewhat distant. That morning, Emily shared her concerns with her team, expressing unease over the orca's mood. They reassured her that it was likely nothing serious, just a passing phase. Though comforted by their words, Emily found it hard to push her worries aside, hoping the show would go smoothly as always. Little did she know, her concerns would prove well-founded, though the realization would come far too late. Orcas, or killer whales, are magnificent yet untamable creatures of the sea, their intelligence matched by a raw power that few animals can rival. Known as apex predators, they hunt seals, fish, and even other whales with incredible precision. In the wild, orcas roam hundreds of miles, navigating the ocean's depths with an independence that captivates and commands respect. Trainers understand this well, recognizing that the orca's wild nature always lurks beneath the surface. Yet, amidst the daily routines and familiar interactions, it's easy to forget that these beautiful animals are not merely performers. They are wild beings capable of instinct and strength that no amount of training can fully contain. The performance began without a hitch. Nayar moved through her opening routines gracefully, leaping high into the air and splashing back down with a force that sent waves crashing across the tank. The crowd erupted in cheers, and Emily felt a flicker of relief. Perhaps she had just been overthinking things. But as the show went on, an uneasy feeling settled in. Nayar's movements became sharper, unpredictable in a way that set Emily's nerves on edge. Only she could see it. The crowd was oblivious, caught up in the excitement, but something felt off. Nayar was circling faster than usual, her dorsal fin cutting through the water with a speed that made Emily uneasy. Finally, they reached the finale. It was their signature move, and the crowd always loved it. Emily dove into the tank, plunging into the cool water as the audience's cheers surged around her. As she descended, the familiar thrill of the performance took over, and she signaled to Nayar to join her. Nayar swam close, her massive shadow passing beneath Emily, closer than usual. Emily reached out a hand, signaling Nayar to back up slightly. Then, before she could fully register what was happening, Nayar's behavior took a frightening turn. In an instant, Nayar's massive 21-foot, 11,500-pound body surged forward, and before Emily could react, the orca's powerful jaws clamped down on her leg. The grip was fierce, an overwhelming strength that dragged her downward with brutal force. The water exploded into chaos as Nayar pulled Emily deeper, twisting and thrashing. Panic surged, but her training kicked in as she tried to free herself, her mind racing even as she felt the icy sting of pain shoot through her leg. Blood began to cloud the water around them as Nayar's grip tightened. In the stands, the crowd's cheers turned to gasps, then horrified screams as the reality of the situation dawned on them. Emily's parents were there, watching, their joy shattered as they saw her struggle. Her mother's voice broke through the noise, her cries frantic and helpless. Along the edge of the tank, trainers sprang into action, throwing ropes, shouting commands, and trying to reach Emily. But it was clear that nothing was breaking through Nayar's grip. Emily's movement slowed as her strength faded. She reached toward the surface, her hand breaking through for a brief, desperate moment before Nayar pulled her back under. The water around them was dark now, tinged red as Emily's fight weakened. The orca continued to thrash, her body moving with a terrifying, relentless power that left the trainers on the edge of the tank frozen with helplessness. Then, as quickly as it had begun, it was over. Nayar released her grip, and Emily's body floated slowly toward the surface. Rescue divers reached her within seconds, pulling her limp form from the tank, but it was already too late. The audience was silent, the park blanketed in shock. What had started as a joyful display had ended in tragedy, and the news of Emily Cadeau's death spread quickly, casting a long shadow over Blue Waters. In the days that followed, Blue Waters Marine Park shut down all orca performances, and the gates eventually closed for good. Emily's friends and family held a quiet memorial by the ocean, honoring the life of a woman who had dedicated herself to the animal she loved. Her parents, heartbroken, shared stories of her passion, and her friends stood in silence, grappling with the loss of someone so young, so full of life. Those who had been there that day were left with a haunting reminder. Despite the years of training and care, the wild could never truly be tamed. Nayar's actions were a chilling reminder of that truth, and Emily's memory remained tied to the sea she had loved so dearly. Keiko was born in the wild off the coast of Iceland around September 24, 1976. He was just a toddler when his world was violently upended. In 1979, a whaler named Joe Gunnarsson and his team, working for the whaling company, attacked Keiko's family. The orcapod, which had likely roamed the cold waters of the North Atlantic for generations, was torn apart, and Keiko was captured. At only 3 years old, he was taken to a small aquarium in Iceland, far from the ocean and family he knew. He was given the name Sigi, and eventually Keiko, the name he would carry through the rest of his tumultuous life. Keiko's early years in captivity were nothing short of distressing. His new home, a tiny, barren tank at a theme park near a remote town in Iceland, was a far cry from the vast open waters of his homeland. As he grew, his living conditions worsened. The small, confined space did little to accommodate his natural instincts and behavior. For years, Keiko performed tricks for audiences, living a life of entertainment that starkly contrasted his life in the wild. Despite the apparent cheerfulness of the shows, something was deeply wrong. Keiko was far from home, his health deteriorating, and the calls for his release grew louder. In 1982, after his time in Iceland, Keiko was sold to Marineland in Ontario, Canada. There, he was thrust into a larger facility, performing for bigger crowds. Yet the challenges continued. His skin began to show signs of stress, developing painful lesions likely caused by the poor conditions and chemicals in the water. Keiko struggled to fit in with the older female orcas in the facility, as he had not been part of their pod from the beginning. His attempts to interact were met with aggression, and he became a solitary, broken creature. Marineland, unable to address the issue, sold him again in 1985. Keiko's new home was Reno Aventura in Mexico City. The conditions here were perhaps the worst yet. At only 10 feet long, he was housed in a tank built for dolphins, a far cry from the space he needed. His growing body, now reaching 21 feet, barely fit in the cramped enclosure. The tank was only 65 feet wide and 22 feet deep. The water temperature was far warmer than Keiko could tolerate, and the tank was filled with chlorine, a harsh chemical that irritated his skin. To save money, the park owners used salt water instead of natural seawater, further exacerbating his condition. Keiko was forced to perform up to 5 times a day despite his deteriorating health. He was a showpiece, a commodity that earned money but at the cost of his well-being. Despite the harsh environment, Keiko remained gentle. His spirit, though fractured by years of captivity, still showed remarkable resilience and compassion. In 1993, Keiko's life changed forever when he became the star of Free Willy. The film told the heartwarming story of a young boy named Jesse who fought to free his captive orca friend, Willy. Keiko's portrayal of Willy resonated deeply with audiences worldwide, transforming him from an anonymous captive orca into a global symbol of hope and freedom for marine animals. The film's powerful message struck a nerve, but it also divided opinions. For many, Free Willy was an inspiring tale that celebrated the bond between humans and animals, sparking a wave of admiration for orcas like Keiko. However, others saw the movie as deeply troubling, believing it highlighted the very exploitation it sought to condemn. Critics argued that using a real captive orca to tell a story about freedom was ironic if not devastating, and called attention to the ethics of keeping such intelligent creatures in captivity for entertainment. Keiko's real-life story mirrored Willy's in many ways, further deepening the public's emotional connection to him. This connection sparked an unprecedented movement. Over 300,000 people called, wrote letters, and signed petitions demanding Keiko's release. To them, Keiko had become more than just a movie star, he was the living embodiment of the freedom Willy achieved on screen. But while the world rallied around him, the harsh truth about Keiko's life painted a far darker picture. Far from the vibrant, playful creature portrayed in Free Willy, Keiko was severely overweight by the time the movie hit theaters. His lesions had worsened, he had developed stomach ulcers, and his immune system was compromised. He was barely able to perform. Even the $75,000 he earned for his role in the film, a sum that could have provided much-needed care, was pocketed by his owners instead of being used to help him. Yet the calls for his release continued, and soon a solution began to form. In 1995, the Free Willy Keiko Foundation was established. Led by Warner Brothers and the International Marine Mammal Project, the foundation worked tirelessly to raise funds for Keiko's freedom. Over $7 million was raised, with contributions coming from generous benefactors and millions of school children. With this money, a plan was set in motion to rehabilitate Keiko and, if possible, return him to the wild. In January 1996, Keiko was moved from Mexico to the Oregon Coast Aquarium in Newport, Oregon. For the first time in his life, Keiko lived in a tank with seawater, and conditions were significantly better. He stayed there for 8 months, regaining some of his strength he had lost during his years of captivity. His weight increased and he became healthier, but the ultimate goal was to prepare him for his return to the wild. Preparations for Keiko's release began in earnest in 1998. On September 9th, he was flown to Kivik Bay, a small island off the coast of Iceland. Keiko's rehabilitation was a careful, gradual process. He was trained to swim long distances and to learn how to hunt for food on his own. He was fitted with a satellite transmitter, and supervised swims in the open ocean began. Keiko was learning to become the orca he had once been, reconnecting with his natural instincts. After 17 long years in captivity, Keiko was ready for the ocean. In the summer of 2002, the moment everyone had waited for arrived. Keiko was released into the wild off the coast of Iceland. It was a historic event, the first time a captive orca was returned to the open ocean. Initially, Keiko swam freely in the open waters, spotted in the bay for days. But as the weeks passed, something unexpected occurred. Keiko, despite his newfound freedom, still sought out human company. He remained close to the bay, often interacting with people. Although he sometimes swam with wild orcas, he never fully integrated with them. In December 2003, Keiko, now 27 years old, was found swimming in the bay in Norway when he succumbed to pneumonia. His passing was the tragic end of a long, complex journey, one that had started with hope but was ultimately too much for him to overcome. It was a day like any other in 1971 when SeaWorld's latest star, Shamu, a 9-year-old orca, performed her tricks before an eager crowd. The audience marveled at the sheer power and grace of the killer whale as she swam in synchronized routines, delighting families and children. For years, the name Shamu had been a symbol of joy and wonder, a living testament to the marvels of the ocean. But on that fateful day, everything changed. Shamu's life had been one of captivity and confusion since her violent capture from the waters of Puget Sound in 1965. She had been torn from her mother by Ted Griffin, a man known for his ruthless orca hunts. The traumatic capture left Shamu with scars that would never heal. Her mother, desperate to protect her, had been harpooned and left bleeding, sinking like a stone into the water. Shamu was left behind, helpless, as Griffin claimed her for his collection. After her capture, Shamu was sold to SeaWorld, where she was thrust into a world far from the open waters she once roamed. The marine park, a new attraction in San Diego, promised to showcase the beauty of the ocean, but it was a paradise only for the humans. For Shamu, it was an unending nightmare of confinement. The tank she was housed in was too small for her 1,700-pound frame, 20 feet by 30 feet, a mere fraction of the space she needed. For Shamu, the vast expanse of the ocean was replaced by cold concrete walls and glass. The natural world she had once known was gone. In SeaWorld, Shamu's days were filled with forced performances. She was trained to jump, spin, and interact with her trainers in ways that went against every instinct her body had left. Despite her obedience, the mental and physical toll of captivity began to wear on her. The park, oblivious to the damage it was inflicting, continued to use Shamu as a living spectacle, a symbol of entertainment and profit. The crowds cheered, but Shamu's spirit quietly broke under the strain of captivity. By 1971, SeaWorld had grown into a bustling empire, expanding with new parks in Florida and Texas. The demand for more orcas was high, and the company continued to capture and confine wild orcas. But beneath the success of the shows, a darker truth began to emerge. Shamu's life was not one of joy, but of immense suffering, and the attack that would unfold that year was a consequence of the years of abuse she had endured. On April 19, 1971, SeaWorld Public Relations Director Gail McLaughlin and employee Kent Burgess devised a stunt they believed would show just how safe and thrilling the orca shows were. They asked Anna Eckes, a SeaWorld secretary and trained scuba diver, if she would be interested in riding Shamu as part of a promotional event. Anna, eager to be close to the famous orca, agreed to participate. Anna entered the water with Shamu, following the cues given by her by the trainers. At first, everything seemed fine. Shamu swam calmly toward her, cooperative as always. Anna climbed onto her back and raised her hand in the air, smiling at the crowd. But the trust between Shamu and her trainers did not extend to strangers. For Shamu, who had suffered years of mental strain and trauma, the sudden presence of an unfamiliar person was too much. Without warning, Shamu hurled Anna off her back and into the water. Chaos erupted. Anna, stunned and disoriented, struggled to react as Shamu's powerful jaws clamped down on her leg. The audience's screams were drowned out by the horrifying sound of teeth sinking into flesh. Shamu dragged Anna beneath the surface, her body thrashing violently through the water. Blood began to stain the pool as Anna's leg was held tightly in the orca's mouth. The trainers, frantic, dove into the water in a desperate attempt to stop the attack. One trainer swam towards Shamu's mouth, forcing open her jaw with all his strength. After what felt like an eternity, Shamu released Anna, who was pulled from the water, her leg battered and bleeding. The crowd fell into stunned silence, unable to comprehend what they had just witnessed. Anna was rushed to the hospital, where doctors worked to close the deep gash in her leg. She survived the attack but was left with lasting physical and emotional scars. She filed a lawsuit against SeaWorld, citing negligence, fraud, and the inherent dangers of working with wild animals. Anna was awarded $17,500 in damages, but no amount of money could undo the trauma she had experienced. Shamu's life after the attack only worsened. Her performing days were over, but the isolation and confinement she endured continued to take a toll. Without the stimulation of her daily shows, Shamu was left to circle endlessly in her tiny tank. The constant mental and physical stress of captivity began to degrade her health. By the end of 1971, Shamu contracted a severe uterine infection that could not be treated. She died at just 9 years old, a tragic victim of a system that exploited her for profit. In the wild, orcas can live to be 80 years old, but Shamu's life was cut short by the cruelty she had endured in captivity. Her death was a blow to SeaWorld's image, but the park continued to profit from the spectacle of orca shows. A new orca, Helena, took Shamu's place and the shows went on. But Shamu's tragic life remained a dark reminder of the cost of human entertainment. For decades, SeaWorld continued to captivate audiences with orcas, but the price paid by the animals was always hidden beneath the surface. Thank you so much for watching this orca attack compilation. If these attacks have convinced you that orca shows should be banned, let us know in the comments below. And if you're not yet done watching, there's a new video on your screen right now.